going to take the opportunity to introduce Mary Holmes. Some of you know Mary, and some of you have attended her lectures before, and for some of you this is a first experience. But we're so fortunate that you're willing to come and do this.
Oh, I'm just happy to do it. It's very nice.
We've heard Mary refer to Chinese art and Oriental arts in her other lectures. You can hardly get into something and not do that. But we've never heard her just talk about Chinese art. So this is really a very special treat.
Just a great pleasure for me. I enjoy talking about it. And Chinese art has such a deeply different intention, really, than what most Western art. And the best way to illustrate that is with the kind of stories that persist about art and about artists. And the earliest story about painters in Western art is about Apelles, and nothing remains. We have nothing but his name. When he was recognized as the greatest artist at the high period of Greek art. The great phrase that went also through at least 1,000 years of Western history, ars simia natura, which means art imitates nature. And Apelles entered a competition for painters, and one of the painters painted a picture of grapes, and birds came and pecked it, and the appearance of nature, being able to fool nature, was the highest accolade that you could get. You know, that just is a pervasive and continuing concept of what the artist does, simulates nature. And the more directly and more closely and more accurately and more astoundingly, almost magically, the better. And that still remains a very, very strong concept of what the artist is meant to be doing. Now, the stories which exist in Chinese art are the opposite. They are not concerned with the imitation of nature. They're concerned with the creation of life, the actual making of life. That is, and the stories are such things as one of the great temples was painted and was with a dragon motif and all. None of the dragons had eyes. Their eyes were all shut. And the people that had commissioned it said, well, we can't have that. The dragon's eyes are the most important thing. The whole nature is in his eyes. And so you have to paint them in. He said, I mustn't do it. I can't do it. I shouldn't do it. And the people said, you have to do it. And he painted the dragon's eyes, and they set fire to the whole temple and burned it to the ground, the eyes of the dragons. They go on like that, painting of a horse that is just so marvelous that the horse gallops off of the page. Not that it fools you by its appearance, but it is a thing, it is a living thing. And this is the extraordinary and very profound difference, because, of course, to be able to make that act of creativity, it shows what is the intention of the artist is to give it life. And actually, because of this conviction that that's the important thing, that's the thing to do, the artist does do that, does succeed in giving an extraordinary sense of the presence of life in something which is actually, not trying to imitate the appearance of something. So that the great examples are the early bronzes. Dates are thought of as around 1200 BC and then on up to maybe 400. They have this amazing sense of being a living thing, even though they don't have the form of an animal, or if they do have the form of an animal, because they do both. They have a kind of intensity of life in them that can't be analyzed. You can't figure out where it comes from or anything, but it's there. it gives them a frightening quality, which adds to, of course, their value as a ceremonial objects. They take on a majesty, and they take on a vividness and a sense of their own tremendous life power that it makes them suitable for religious ceremonies. I think it's safe to say that no one else ever did that. No other civilization ever did that. I can't think of any instance in which that's true. Of course, so many ceremonial objects and ceremonial images are so ruthlessly stripped of their power by being displayed as works of art instead of what they're meant to be, under conditions where ceremonial life could never exist, which is in a museum. The preciousness and the extraordinariness of these objects was recognized by everybody. And it was something which people, well, for one thing, it meant that there were a tremendous number of forgeries, beginning at a very, very early time, like beginning before the Tang period, which is the 6th century A.D. People would make an image and bury it to be dug up in 400 years. It was like putting money in the bank, but in a very long living bank, and one that was not apt to go broke, So their ancestors would know that maybe in the next 100 years we'll dig this up and have a great treasure, and they did it all the time, and it's almost impossible to tell whether they are forgeries, because they've been sitting then in the earth, you see, long enough to make all the ways in which they could be identified except stylistically, and stylistically they're exactly right. And part of this is, in a way, the modesty of the artist, which recognizes that to give life to something is not your power. It's power that comes through you, and therefore there's a very little concern with what in the Western world would be called forgery. There is the idea that this life force which can be caught in a work of art, it doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anybody. It is its own self, and therefore, if you make something that has this, you're not the one that made it. You're only the vehicle. You're the thing through which it was made. And so the sense of forgery doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all. If they could make a marvelous copy, a living, vital copy of something, they could sign the name of the original thing that they had copied. It's as though it's such a wonderful contrast, to what's going on right now, and has been now for 30, 40 years, of identifying Rembrandt's work and trying to separate it from the work of his pupils and the work of the people that he worked with and he had working for him in the studios, doing exactly the opposite thing, you see, trying to make it clear that there's only this body of work that is actually Rembrandt's, and all the things that look like Rembrandt and were painted at the time by his pupils or through his apprentices or whatever, those can be then put in another category. So that it's exactly the opposite idea. You see, it's the idea that the artist is, in a sense, responsible for his work, and you want to be sure that that responsibility is put on the right paintings, not on something which isn't that. But it's a completely the opposite of the idea of the artist really being able to channel the power that makes the work of art, whatever it is, and modestly doing it so that he can sign another name, or he can, which they very commonly did, or which would be not anything that he felt really was he had made, but it had been made through him. And because of this, also, connoisseurs who bought paintings, if they felt that they could, if they would write on the painting itself, in the most beautiful calligraphy that they could contrive, a testimony to the painting. and sometimes a little poem about the painting. But the people who bought it, the people who had it, would do it. Another thing, which the art belonged to the highest levels of people's capacity or ability in terms of actually the bureaucracy of the state. Now, one of the things which will give you a very severe pause, I think, and make you reevaluate your life and the life of your society, that is the test for somebody entering the great bureaucratic world of China. The test was to write a poem and illustrate it. That was the whole test. And one of the famous ones was a poem which would translate roughly, "The horse's legs are red with the juice of strawberries." The picture was of horses, people riding through a strawberry bed of wild strawberries, and dyeing the horses' feet red. And you see what that requires. The people who can judge it, who can pass on it or not pass on it. And I think there isn't a person in our entire society who could do either make application for that job or decide whether or not that person should have it. I don't think there is one solid person, because all of the arts are in the prolonged and distressing effort to commit suicide. And most of them have entirely succeeded. So there is not, the arts have sunk down to whatever the lowest possible level of what they can do, so that the best poetry is being written by country western singers, and the best paintings are probably on the paper plates. But it is not a time when anybody could write a poem and illustrate it and get an important job, say President of the United States or something. So the distance between the concept of art and the concept of what the artist does is just immeasurable and of course quite inaccessible. We are not able to do it. And of course the highest art is calligraphy. That is the highest art. Of course it's inaccessible to us, actually. We can enjoy it, but just as not, you see, the difference between calligraphy and pattern is that the calligraphy is saying something, and it's important what it's saying. I mean, if it's the great connection is that the painting in China is done with the same instruments that writing is done with. So that there is an inevitable overlay in their development and in their usage and everything else. But and again, this automatically makes the judgment of it and the making of it to fall on the scholar, to fall on the person who is as knowledgeable as possible, and who is also then as inventive and capable of the kind of thing that different scholars would develop a particular calligraphy to write to their friend, and other people couldn't even read it. Well, I have friends who are somewhat under that order too, but and also they began to particularly in the late Sung period, which is the 13th century AD, there was a kind of madness that overtook a sense of the extraordinary irrationality and power of the impulses of life, that meant that one calligrapher painted with the tail of his horse. I mean, while it was on the horse, not cut off and turned into horsehair brushes, but he would dip the horse's tail in ink and let him switch flies then over the thing and make out of that. I mean, it's a kind of, you know, Jackson Pollock thing, actually, and comes from the same, I think, the same source, the same, you know, idea. So it has this marvelous business of being the common instrument, the thing which you use all the time to write, just to write a grocery list, and also the thing which is potential to show the deepest and most profound emotions or thoughts that you can possibly have, or anybody else can have. That these are common things, and they cannot be sacred unless they're common. And I think that this gives the kind of depth or kind of really the spiritual power to Chinese painting. Well, let's look at some of our. When we look at the bronzes, it's an extraordinary thing, the way that they have that kind of vitality that is so much the whole nature of Chinese art. And it's not any way that you can really analyze it or find out how to do it or any of those things. It just is evident. You see, this bronze has a kind of presence and a kind of authority of its being there. You can't imagine anything shaking it. Do you feel that when you look at it? It has this kind of deeply rooted self that is, and it isn't that it looks like any kind of animal, but it also has one of the things which is characteristic of the bronzes, and it's called the Daodia mask, and it is an animal mask. And you can see it there. You see the two eyes and the nose and the horns on the side of that. And it is this quality of the mask of when you see it, it dominates the whole thing. You see it, you see only it, but it has a way of dissolving and becoming elusive. And when you don't see it, you don't even notice it. I mean, you are not aware of it. But once you do see it, the animal strength of it, the curious and that whole elusive image of the animal, and it is just a horned animal, but it is not any specific one. And it is flattened out in this way into a mask, but it appears over and over again, lost sometimes almost completely in the details of overlapping patterns and so on, but otherwise not. And once you look at that, and then you feel that this is the thing that is there. This peculiar and extraordinary animal is the bronze. These were all, no one knows exactly what they were, but they were all different ceremonial objects. The same pattern is used over centuries that are used. Let's look at the next one. You see, you just cannot. You just can't avoid the fact that this is a creature who has a good deal to say to you too. I mean, you better pay attention. Look at his wonderful feet. He's just such a, and there's so little there. It's just, but what is there has enormous power of being itself and of holding your attention, of having presence and having a life that you have to pay attention to because it's so vivid and so powerful, and it has also a kind of something almost comic about it. There's something. It's such a fusion of all kinds of attitudes or emotions that it's as engaging as meeting somebody that you didn't know. And they gradually unfold. And that's exactly the way this happens. Let's look at the next one. You see what a different creature this is, and how much inclined toward elegance and look at his fancy feet as opposed to those wonderful clubby feet that the owl had. And everything about it has a dandyish, has an elegance, has a kind of polish and sharpness to it, but still with that the quality of life. And you looking at it, you just forget that it's actually a container. It's actually something which is meant just to be used as a container.